Welcome back to Whiskey and Wine. I'm Sam, and I am doing this one solo because my partner in crime is currently not feeling super well. So, if everyone could go down and wish that Heather would be feeling better, that'd be awesome. But today we are talking about 10 wine myths. I have them written out here, and we are going to go through them and talk about why they're myths and kind of debunk them. I am going to revisit this at a later date with Heather because getting her thoughts on this is going to be very amusing. But let's dive in. So, really, in any industry, there are going to be tons of myths that people talk about, whether it's going to be a certain way that you have to do something, a certain way you have to enjoy something, just all of these do's and don'ts that may be part of just like the ritual of doing this thing, or it might be some weird high society thing that someone says you have to do to really get this right when you really don't actually have to do it. That is going to be really the majority of these ones, I feel like, where it's someone saying, hey, you need to do blank to enjoy wine, or someone saying that, no, this is dumb, you don't really have to do that, because they might not understand the science of it. Those are really going to be the main two categories for wine, whiskey as well, but we're only talking about the wines. Starting with myth number one, swirling wine does not do anything. Different wine glasses are going to be for different types of wine. And if you have a wine like, or I say a wine glass like this, swirling it is going to really help the wine open up a little bit. So what you're doing, if you are swirling the wine, you're spinning that liquid around in there, it's going to allow the air to interact with that wine a little bit more, which is going to help it open up or release some more aromas and flavors that you might not get otherwise. The same can be said the decanter. If you can tell how dirty this is, I apologize. I need to clean this again. But with decanters, when you take it, you dump your wine in, the wine is right away interacting with all of the air. And then as it's sitting in the base of it, it's going to have more room to interact with all of the air than it would if it was just sitting in the bottle. Therefore, it is going to open up a little bit more. You're going to get more flavors. It's going to soften some tannins. And it's going to make the wine just taste a little bit different. Some people say better. Some people say it's just softer, whatever it may be. But regardless, swirling the wine, aerating it, allowing it to open up a little bit more is what you're doing when you swirl wine, and it is actually useful. Now, you don't need to swirl your wine every single time, but right off the bat, it's a nice thing to do if you want to help open it up a little bit faster. So let's get into myth number two. So myth number two is going to be that screw caps mean inferior quality. There are going to be a lot of screw cap wines that you're going to find out there. I don't think it means inferior quality. Just get that out of the way. Mainly because Australia and New Zealand are going to not use corks most of the time because they just don't get them as easily as we do here in the US or up in Europe, things like that. It's easier for them just to use a screw cap. Now, historically, corks were always used because that's just what people had. Everything corked. Or, excuse me, not corked, but everything used a cork to seal it. And now you can use these screw caps, which I personally prefer screw caps. One, it's easier to open, and two, it's a little bit easier to reseal them so you can store them again. Whereas if you don't have a really good vacuum sealer, it's kind of hard to restore a wine again. So it does not necessarily mean inferior quality. Yes, a lot of the cheaper wines are going to use a screw cap instead of using a cork, but there are going to be some really good wines out there, especially from New Zealand or Australia, who are going to use a screw cap just because that's what they use. All right, myth number three. What do we got? Wine, depending on the type of wine, should always be drank at a specific temperature. This is one that I wanted Heather to be able to talk about because there's a specific couple of wines that we deviate from this very. So if you have a red wine, people are going to say always drink it at room temperature. If you have a white wine, it's supposed to be chilled, but not like ice cold. And then if you have a rosé, most people say that rosé should be also chilled. We really don't agree with some of these because we find that you can get a little bit more flavor out of something when it is at room temperature. Now, it doesn't mean it tastes better. Maybe, maybe not. The main one that we've experienced this with is going to be a rosé. Most rosés, like I said, are going to be served at least cooler or chilled. And there's going to be a couple that we've had where we much prefer it at room temperature. Specifically, it's going to be like a Pinot Noir rosé. Room temperature Pinot Noir rosé is delicious. Or if it has a similar grape used in it, fantastic. You get a little bit more of those flavors that are going to be a little bit more muted if it's chilled. One of the things just with flavors of really anything, if something is chilled, you're not going to get quite as much flavor, but if something is at room temperature, you're usually going to get a broader spectrum, but sometimes that broader spectrum includes some flavors that aren't quite as desirable, which is why a lot of people chill a lot of different drinks to just make it a little bit more desirable. One of the funny ones with this is just America and our beer. I believe it's over in Europe. They really don't drink their beer cold, whereas we always want our beer ice cold. I just find it really funny, and it speaks to the quality or the type of beer that we enjoy compared to what they enjoy. In brief summary of that, you don't have to drink it always at the same temperature. If you want to chill your red wine, chill your red wine. If you want to drink your rosé at room temperature, drink it at room temperature. You don't have to follow these things. These are just more guidelines and not really a hard, fast rule. Myth number 4, the legs of a wine are going to tell you about its quality. The legs of the wine are going to tell you about the structure. It's going to tell you, is this more full-bodied? Is this going to have more sugar in it? Are these thicker tiers or legs? What's the alcohol content? It's going to give you some ideas about the wine, but it's not going to tell you about the quality of the wine. You can have some wines that have some really fast forming legs that are going to be just these nice narrow legs, or find one that is a really thick leg. It doesn't really mean anything about the quality. It just talks about how the wine was made and what the final product is going to be like. It just kind of gives you some hints on that without giving everything away. Myth number 5. This one I find to be kind of funny because you do get to play with it a little bit more and a little bit more easily. It's that white wines only go with fish or white meats, whereas red wines are going to go with all of your red meats. Again, this is a very nice guideline, but it is not a hard, fast rule. Once you kind of get a little bit more experience with wine, or if you want to do something just a little bit more interesting, you can start pairing really any type of wine with anything as long as you are pulling out those flavor notes. I've talked about this in a previous video where you can do a complementary thing or a congruent pairing. So if you have something that is sweet, you might want to pair it with something that is salty. So you have a really salty dish, pair it with a sweet wine, or vice versa, just something a little bit more saline in it. But it doesn't just have to be whites with the white meat and red with the red meats. You can start to figure out where, hey, this red meat has a little bit more of these minerality to it. So I'm going to pair it with something that also has a little bit more minerality, which might be a white wine. So you might try to pair a white meat that has these more earthy tones to it to a red wine that also has these similar earthy notes to it. So again, a good guideline, but not a hard, fast rule. Myth number 6. You should only drink wine from established regions. This one makes me laugh because I always question, well, what's an established region? Historically, people would have just said like France, Italy, anywhere really in Europe or the old world is an established wine. But now people will say, oh, you can get good wine from Sonoma, from Napa, from Oregon, Washington. Yeah, those are all established now, but historically they weren't, but they have been for the last, what, 30 years, maybe 40 years, something like that. But the point is, there can be good quality wine coming from a variety of places. For example, Michigan now is popping up with some really interesting wines that are really, really good. So you don't always just have to get wine from an established region. You can find some really good wines that are really coming from anywhere all over the world as long as they are producing the wine well and if they are basically being smart about it. With that, let's dive into myth number 7. You can't drink red wine with spicy food. If you've ever tried this, say you've gone to like, I don't know, a Indian restaurant or a Middle Eastern restaurant, and you're like, I'm gonna get this chicken tikka masala, gonna get it spicy, and you go home and you open a bottle of red wine with it, it might not go too well. Or you have some spicy wings, excuse me, and you try to pair it with the red wine. Might not go too well. The reason for this is the tannins of that, as well as usually the higher alcohol content, is just going to kick up that spice even more. So one of the things I like to do if I'm going to pair something with spicy, get something sweet to kind of calm it down a little bit more. So if you get a sweet red wine or a red wine blend that's just a little bit lighter, even like a Pinot Noir really, you can pair it with something spicy. But again, this is usually a little bit more difficult, so you have to play with it a little bit, but it can be done. It's just not ordinarily done. Myth number 8. All organic wines are better for the environment. This one kind of made me laugh because people are like, oh, well, the organic wine, it's made with all of these organic things that are just better, so it doesn't really mess with it. That's not always the case. Organic doesn't mean low intervention. So if you just have a winery that really is not messing with the grapevine, they are not running too much fertilizer, or they're using just like a basic one, yeah, that might not mess with the environment quite as much. But if you are organic, so you're using just organic fertilizer, organic pesticide, and all of these other things, they might be organic, but not organic to maybe that region, or other things as well that you might just be introducing to that area that is not really going to help the environment. So organic, especially in wines, does not always mean better for the environment. Sure, low intervention might be, but for the most part, especially when you're looking at European wines, they have a very strict set of rules that they follow, but a lot of these rules are also just custom based. So they say this is how you make the wine. It's not a hard, fast rule, but if you go outside of this, people are going to know and you're going to be looked at sideways and you're probably not going to last too long. So they are very hard on their tradition there. So they really follow it. All right, home stretch. Myth number 9. You need to have a wine fridge or a cellar for your wine. Yes, if you're someone who is trying to collect a lot of wine and you're trying to maybe age it for a long time, or you want to just keep collecting it until it makes a lot of money and then you can sell it on the secondary and again make a lot of money on it. Sure, at that point you do need a cellar and you might want to look into a wine fridge as well. But do you need one if you are day-to-day person like myself? No. I have a good amount of wine right now. Probably we're sitting at like 51 bottles of wine right now, but these are going to turn over within about a year or two. Typically less than 2 years. So about a year is usually when I'm like, okay, we need to wrap this guy up and get it out of here. We're sharing these wines with a lot of people, so they turn over relatively quickly, and we don't need to have a wine fridge for them. That being said, if I have a red wine and I'm just want to open it up a little bit more or I'm getting ready to serve it, I'll usually stick it in the fridge for about 15 minutes and then I'll take it out right before serving it, just to bring the temperature down a little bit more. I do have a little wine fridge that's hiding down here, but that's just for our sparkling wines because I needed an extra place to really store them. So we got this little guy for I think it was like 20 bucks on Facebook Marketplace. It holds 6 bottles of wine, nothing crazy, but it is not needed. It's nice, but it is not needed by any stretch of the imagination. Would I love to have a giant wine fridge just to kind of store things at the perfect temperature so I know they're gonna stay good for longer? Sure. I'm in an apartment. I don't really have space for that. And most people don't have space or the time or the money to go invest in all of that. So no, it's not worth it, especially if you're going to be drinking your wine within a year. You don't need it. Which brings us to our last myth. I don't remember what it was. Myth number 5, wine snobbery is necessary for enjoying your wine. When I was looking this up and that was one of the top ones that kept coming up, I was confused, I guess. Because I do think it is nice to understand the craft a little bit more so you can understand, oh, this wine actually is a high quality. They put more effort into this wine. This is what makes this wine different, so I can appreciate it a little bit more if you want to nerd out about it. Awesome. But it's not necessary. If you're someone you're just like, I just like my Pinot Noirs, just set a Pinot Noir in front of me. If it's good, awesome. If it's not great, well, I might not enjoy it as much. I still might finish it, but we're just going to move on and go on with our day. Again, totally fine. You do not need to have all of this knowledge to enjoy something. Do I think it helps? Yes. Do I think the snobbery of it, of like, oh, this wine isn't as high quality as this other wine from Burgundy? No, it's not necessary. Honestly, that gets on my nerves when someone's like, oh, this wine can't be as good because it's not from this region or from this year or blah, 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 blah. If someone's enjoying a wine, just let them enjoy their stinking wine and move on with the day. So now, snobbery is not necessary. Having some background knowledge about it, that can help. But again, not necessary, just a fun little add-on. There are a ton of misconceptions and a ton of myths around the world of wine. If I missed any, go ahead, let me know down below, and maybe we can have a little fun conversation about it. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this, just debunking a couple of wine myths. Have a good week. Cheers.